Welcome to the SAS Via Release Highlight Show. We're going to talk about release updates from version 2021.1.5 today. I'm Anna Brown, your host, and I can't wait to get to the cool features that we'll show off today. What are we going to talk about? Well, there's some new connection points in SAS Access. There's also now a natural language explanation of your data in SAS Visual Analytics. And you can assess predictive models for bias in SAS Visual Data Mining and Machine Learning. The second half of the show is going to be super fun because we're talking about a brand spanking new editor for Python in SAS Studio. I'll be joined by Principal Product Manager Amy Peters, and she'll show us all about that. Lots to get to, but before I get started, I want to invite you to the show. We'd like to hear your thoughts, comments, suggestions, questions, and we'll have a little fun today, actually giving you a quiz-like question, a fill in the blank. So humor us here. Fill in the blank. My biggest challenge with working with open source and SAS is blank. Can't wait to hear from you. Without further ado, I introduce the rundown.
When working with our customers, one of the key things they want to do is not move data around too much. So where we're trying to score records or run queries against that data, we want to, as much as possible, push all of that processing down to where that data relies. And this month's Spotlight releases are all about that. We've added support for DataBricks to the SAS Access to Spark, and we've also released in-database scoring for Synapse on Spark. A little bit more quickly about these. So Access to Spark is all about being able to push more down into Spark and recognize that. So where we write some SQL or use procs within our SAS coding, all of that will run in database rather than pulled back into the SAS engines to run there. Again, a big saving in time and costs for our customers in doing that. Synapse and database scoring. So scoring models is typically used in, for example, in financial services where we've built a model to say who will pay a loan back. And when new applications come in, we use that model to make decisions on who we lend to and who we don't lend to. So access to the in-database scoring is all about that. And we've given that capability where we can now publish models into Synapse, and we can use data either stored in SQL Server, within Spark tables, or within Spark datasets, either as inputs or outputs. So all of that model will now run against those millions of rows of data without being moved back into SAS to do that. So we're running that SAS within the database, in this case, Synapse. Really exciting new features, and these will be wanted by our customers all over the globe.
In this release update, I want to introduce 3 new capabilities in Visual Analytics. The first is an end-user capability. We're always trying to add new capabilities for end-user report consumers so they can gain more insights into their data to better inform the decisions they make. So here I am looking at a time series object. I want to learn more, so all I have to do is ask Visual Analytics to explain, and I'll select one of the data items. A natural language generated explanation is provided to me. This is not new. The statistical information has been there for a while. Reporting outliers in my data has been there for a month. The new capability is a forecast is automatically generated for the value for the data item that I specified, and a natural language explanation of that forecast is generated for me. The next capability I want to call out is that key value objects now support number abbreviation and significant digits. So here you see M for the units millions, of course. As I filter my data, you see that the key value object naturally transfers to a different unit, or thousands, as the data is appropriate for that. It makes for a much better, smoother visual transition, a much more pleasant experience. The last capability I want to show today is the ability to export report packages. So what is a report package? Well, a report package is a data snapshot of all the queries needed to support these various visualizations within my report. The ability to export a report package has been available through the CLI since the last month, and now we're making it available through the user interface. Report packages can be consumed by the Visual Analytics SDK to allow you to embed insights into your custom websites, web apps, corporate portals, or any web property.
Today, we're going to look at 3 new features. First is Discovery Agent Enhancement, where the admin or data store can find appropriate run status for each agent's successful, failed, never run, and be able to find the catalog assets, new, updated, and total assets, the number of assets that's been cataloged in the last execution. Users can click on the agent and also find a direct deep link to the scheduling window in the Environment Manager, really useful for admins to be able to navigate and to schedule a Discovery Agent job or be able to modify an existing job to schedule it. And also History tab, which provides similar information with additional metrics such as runtime, average runtime, in the environment, created by the user and start and end date, and so on. There's also a deep link similar to the other window, takes them to the Environment Manager job window. Really useful for admins to navigate the Discovery Agent. Second feature is the user can now discover Studio or data flow in the Information Catalog application. They can right-click and open the flow in the SAS Studio application as well. Now the user can search in the Information Catalog search window for the flow and find additional properties in the property panel on the right-hand side, modified by, created by, the date. And the third feature is the user can only find assets now which they are authorized to see. It's a user authorization that's been honored that they find across application in the Viya platform. So if they're not authorized to see an asset, they cannot. And here's a property. By default, that user authorization is enabled, but the admin can choose to turn it off if they wanted to make it available, all the assets available to all the users. That's it for today. See you in the next release. Thank you.
First, you now have the popular open source lightGBM algorithm available for developing gradient boosting machine models. The leafwise growth approach used by this algorithm is much faster than the level-wise growth used by other gradient boosting algorithms like XGBoost, especially for large data sets. You can now create node-level PDF reports as opposed to just a report for the entire project, allowing you to share more detailed results of how a model was created and the assessment of that model. For decision tree models, we now support saving the model as an analytic store or astore, allowing you to manage and deploy these models, which are often quite verbose with many rules, in a very efficient and compact manner. We now support using GANs, generative adversarial networks, for synthetic data generation with tabular data. And this adds to our existing support for image data. So now when you need to expand your data sets or perhaps increase the representation of a certain segment or group in your data, you can now do that with this utility that intelligently generates observations based on existing variable distributions and also preserves correlations among variables. And finally, with responsible use of AI being such a key focus these days, we've just released out-of-the-box capability to assess your predictive models for bias with respect to sensitive attributes, meaning you can get an immediate indication of how fair your model is when applied to different groups. Well, there you have it, some great new features for you to check out in this release of SAS Visual Data Mining and Machine Learning. Until next time.
Great updates, team. Wow. Robin, welcome to the show. It's so nice to see you and get those updates on SAS Access. We can't wait to follow that story in the months to come and those new connections. Okay, we have some participants in the fill in the blank quiz here, which I'm excited to report. Looking like a big challenge of working with open source and SAS is different workflows. So that might be addressed here in the next section. Also connecting open source to SAS, that might relate too. So excited to see you guys chiming in here. All right, so now we get to get right down to it and have a nice long look at a brand spanking new editor for Python code right into SAS Studio. And this shows release talk. I am joined again by Amy Peters, Principal Product Manager. Welcome back to the show, Amy. What are you going to tell us about today?
I'm so excited. Oh my gosh, it's so awesome, Anna. First of all, I apologize. I don't have my costume on. I should have thought about that. Oh, my bad. But I've got a lot of cool stuff to talk about. I know. Well, you look very Halloween-y, but I don't know. No costume? Is that a word? Anyway, so what I'm here to talk about is some Python integration that's new for SAS Studio. So Proc Python, we have talked about in earlier release segments, but I've never really gotten the chance to do the whole story. So what I was hoping to show you is how you can deal with Python programs in SAS Studio and integrate some of your Python code into flows. So is it okay if I show you some of this? I'm really excited to.
Yes, let's look at it. Let's see a demo.
So I've put us in SAS Studio, which hopefully looks familiar at this point, and maybe oddly, but I think it's kind of helpful. Let's just start from the end. So here's where our destination is. So I'm going to build a flow that combines elements that let me use pieces of SAS and pieces of Python. So it's a kind of a cool idea, and it's a fun thing to watch. So let me just start from the beginning and build a flow so you can kind of see where some of this setup comes from and why I need to do what I want to do. And so what I have is I have a CSV file that contains some information about publishing, is historical publishing stuff. So that I'm going to bring in, and I'm perfectly happy with the way I can do some importing in SAS Studio. And so what I'm going to use is the SAS Studio import capability, which allows me to really easily say, okay, let's add an import. And then I'm going to make use of this analyze. And what it basically does is it goes and gets the first few rows and tries to figure out, all right, what are the columns in this thing? What does the data look like, so that I can kind of see what I've got. And so looking at this data, what I'm going to find, and let me just pull this up just a little bit so you can see it. So I pull it up a little bit and basically take a look at a little bit of this data. I can see that in the data, I've got some kind of odd, actually you can't see that, can you? Let me pull it up a little bit more. I've got some odd data that comes out for the publication place. You can see I've got some extra information in there. The years aren't really tight. And so I want to be able to clean this up a little bit. But before I do that, let me also use another kind of easy thing that I can do in a Studio flow and make use of some of these delivered steps like manage columns. And so what I can do with a step like manage columns is to indicate I don't really want all of the data, I don't want all the columns. Instead, I just want a few sets. And it's a really easy kind of point and click thing to say, all right, let me just figure out these up through author, let's say, add those in. And so at this point, this is all stuff that you've seen in Studio Flows, and this is all stuff that's available. But here's where we get a little bit different. The data that I'm dealing with, maybe a colleague has already been messing around with it and already has figured out how to do some of the cleaning, but they're a Python programmer, and I happen to have access to some of their code. So what I'm going to do is take the Python program that they created that cleans up, say, for example, the data publication, and I can add that into my flow as a Python node. And they've also done another one, which was to clean up the place of publication. So let's add that in. And again, another piece of Python code, which as a SAS programmer, I may not be that familiar with Python, but the idea being, okay, so these, I'll just be straightforward. I'm pulling these out of my folder location, so it's my own, but think this could easily be a shared folder on a network somewhere. It could be a get repo that other people are dealing with. But the idea being is as long as I've got access to the code, I can just pull it in and use it, as opposed to having to recode some of this data cleansing in another language like SAS. Now, before we kind of go further, let's just back up a bit, because in earlier videos, I mentioned what's behind here, the Python and the Python editor that's available in SAS Studio now, but I wanted to just kind of remind you and kind of put this a bit in perspective. So as always, I can create SAS programs in SAS Studio, of course. It's a SAS programming interface. We got that. But what you're seeing more and more places now where I can create a Python program, and it's still a first-class citizen, if you will. And what I mean by that is, so let me just take these two programming editors that I've got. I'm going to create a new horizontal group, stack this together so you can kind of do a more side-by-side comparison, if you will. So let me put the SAS program at the top. And hopefully what you see is more similar than different, right? The buttons are very similar. What you can do with them is very similar. What's going to be different here is the code that I'm using. So let me just stick a %put hello world, which is SAS code, and run that. So just putting out some information in the log, just putting out information, putting out a hello world in the log. And you might have noticed that the syntax help that I got was SAS syntax help. The color coding is SAS color coding and so forth. And in my Python code editor, I'm getting Python syntax help, color coding, and so forth. So let's do the same thing in Python. Hello world. Don't forget the quotes, and submit that. And so again, being I don't know if language agnostic is the right way of saying it, but giving as much support as possible to you being able to do coding in whatever language you're the most comfortable with. And so of any of these two editors, I can make snippets out of things, add things to flows. I can, for example, just taking this .py file, schedule it as a job, background submit it. So the kinds of things that I can do with a .sas file, I can do with a .py file. And what's really going on behind the scenes here is some wrapping. So if you look at the log here, what you'll see is what I have in my code editor is Python. What's actually being submitted is proc Python. So we're still talking to SAS. We're still communicating with the SAS compute session, but SAS Studio is taking care of wrapping the SAS syntax around the Python that you've got. And you can see here's the increment and the quit so that it will run. And then the compute session is basically using proc Python to talk to a Python session that's been spun up. And so the idea again being, I don't have to worry about SAS syntax if I'm a Python programmer, or if I'm pulling code from a Python programmer, I don't have to do anything to it. It's still going to run, and it's going to be procized, if you will. It's going to be taken care of on the SAS side. That's a new word, in case you're wondering. I just invented it by SAS. So
Love it.
the couple of, right? So there's a few things that come along with proc Python to make it easy to communicate between SAS and Python. And so when proc Python is enabled, you get a SAS package that has some extra methods and stuff so that you can transfer data and information between the SAS session and the Python session, which is going to be something that people are going to be doing a lot of. And so in this particular example, what I'm showing is some of the ones that I think people will use a lot. So for example, this submit basically says, I'm just going to take some SAS code and submit it from the Python step. And so if I look at the log, I can see, moving down here, there's the work.test that got created. I can call a SAS function from my Python code. So in this case, I'm calling the SAS upcase function on this kind of weird hello world text. So let's just scroll down a little bit and see that. So there's an upcase hello world that comes up. I can create and pull values from SAS macro variables in my Python code. So simget is the traditional SAS function that says, I would like to pull the value of, and so in this case, I'm pulling the value of sysvlong, which is a standard system macro variable that gives me the release of SAS. So I'm saying pull that out and put it in a variable that I can use in Python, or go the other way, which is what this one says, which is take some data and put it into a set from Py macro variable. So I could use that in my macro code. Most interesting, though, and probably the most helpful, are the methods that allow you to pull data to and from SAS datasets and pandas data frames. So in this case, the SD2DF, so SAS dataset to data frame, says take this SAS data set, so in this case, it's a SAS help.class, and put it in a pandas data frame. In this case, we're just calling it DF. And I can go the other way. I can say, okay, take a data frame that I've got. So that's what this next one is doing, and saying, take it and put it back into a SAS data set. And so what's cool here is the sharing that's going on with sessions. So as this code ran, I am going to get essentially a copy of SAS help.class in this work table. And let me just pull up the library panel, and yep, there we go. So there's a temporary data set that got created from my Python session. So the idea being transferring information back and forth hopefully can be as easy as possible. And so what that means is if we go back to the flow that we were building, now what we see in these nodes hopefully will make a little bit more sense. So that first Python node that I pulled over, the step that I pulled over, you'll see that's the call that we just used. So SAS data set to data frame, which says, okay, take a SAS data set, put it in a data frame so I can use it, in this case, to clean up the publication date with this regular expression that we're dealing with. Here's a flow specific piece of information, which is kind of fun. So what data set do I want to pull in to make a data frame out of? Well, whatever this underscore input one is. And if you look, this is a flow feature. So the macro variable port is input one. And so basically what that's saying is whatever data is flowing into this node, that is the data set that I want to transfer into a data frame. Now I've got that data frame in my Python session, so I'm going to use something like NumPy to do a little bit more manipulation to clean up the publication place. And then again, point your attention down here. So now we're going the other way. So now that I've done all this manipulation in Python, let's take that result and put it back out to the output port, which is, again, a function of the flow. So the output port, whatever data, what's going to flow out here. And so now I can keep on flowing, right? So I can keep on saying, maybe I have, let's say a SAS program. So let's pull that in and add it. And you'll notice this SAS program is making use of those same macro variables. It's saying, take whatever comes into the input port and sort it by descending publication date, and then pop that out. And so that's the data that'll keep on flowing. So again, cool thing in that it's kind of, you use the language that you want to, and a lot of functionality is there to try to help make it easy to communicate between them. So I'm actually pretty excited. I think this is pretty cool. What do you think?
I love it, Amy, and I'm loving all the interaction on the chat. We have several questions that I want to get to, but first, I'd like to get some clarification on the setup involved here. Are there specific Python packages available to get up and going with this integration?
Great question. And so for those who are not going to remember this, just Google proc Python, and you'll see some elaborate documentation and all this stuff. I'm going to just run through really quickly. But basically what's going to happen is you're going to configure what Python process SAS is going to point to, and that's going to help determine then what packages are going to be involved. Something else that'll make administrators happy is that SAS Viya comes in a lockdown state by default. So that means actually proc Python is disabled by default, because Python is certainly able to get into and do lots of shell stuff, operating system stuff. And so enabling it is something that an administrator will need to do. And then there are lots of options about how Python interacts with the lockdown and what a programmer is going to be able to do. So there are controls in place. Hopefully that'll make admins a lot more comfy. But yeah, from a package perspective, it's what you point to. So SAS is going to basically just spin off this Python process from the compute session, and it's going to have access to the packages. And then basically you just use your normal import like you do in Python code.
Okay, and so another question from the crowd was that, asking whether all Python models could be used in proc Python, or are there restrictions? So you may have spoken to that, but if you want to expand.
No, it's whatever packages your Python process can get a hold of. So all SAS is doing is just passing that code forward, right? And so what's going to come back? So yes, whatever packages you've got access to, or whatever the packages that process has got access to, that's what you're going to get.
Okay, and let's clarify the version here. So today we're talking about version via 2021.1.5, that is when this feature is available. We have some questions on, do I need to update my current version to get their hands on this editor?
So actually, so the Proc Python itself has been out for a while. I think it came out
Okay.
in 1.3, so several months. And then the editor actually came out in 1.5. And so what is being released this week is actually 21.1.6, which is when the flow step comes in. So what you're seeing is total CI/CD, right? We're going to end up with a little bit each release coming out. But yeah, as of what gets released this week, everything I'm showing you is available. So I hope that helps
Okay.
answer what they were
Yeah,
asking.
no, it does. Another question from our meeting participants here is, will the Python runtime be in this VIA package? And you may have addressed that, but specifically the
So
runtime.
no, so as far as I know, no. That's actually a question I don't know the answer to. So I know you go through configuration to get it, but in terms of I don't think we are delivering a Python runtime, but I'm not positive. So that would actually be good. Hopefully somebody else on the chat can chime in, or worst case, we take this offline and answer it afterwards. But I don't think so.
Okay. Okay. um, this was a question that I had as we were working together to build out this demo, Amy. Does this mean that we'll be building in other language support or integration with other languages like R in future months? And that was actually also a question from someone on LinkedIn.
Yeah, no, great question. So actually, let me answer that in two different ways. So kind of the overarching question that you're asking is, will more language support come? That's certainly planned. So Python was by far the most used and the most requested that we have, and so that's why it's first. But we've had people ask for R and for other languages, and so really, it's a matter of getting that kind of processing in place so that we can take advantage of it in interfaces like Studio. So yes, that's the goal, is to support as much as we can. One thing I did want to mention though is that something that's kind of confusing to a lot of folks is kind of the direction of this. And what I mean by that is, so what's been available for a while is what I would call the outside in. So there's already been technology in place. So a great example would be SAS Pi, which is a Python package that you can use to say, I would like to write Python code, and then it actually translates it into SAS code. So that's like for a developer who just doesn't want to learn SAS syntax, but also ultimately needs to do some sort of SAS processing. Or kind of similarly, the SWAT package is available to say, okay, I am writing Python code that is directly executing CAS actions. So being able to go straight into CAS, call those APIs, and do so. I kind of call that the outside in, meaning I'm in a Python environment and I really want to take advantage of some SAS, but I don't want to have to, go into a SAS environment. So those things are available and have been for a while. And what we're showcasing in this demo is more of the, I would say, inside out, meaning I'm in SAS Studio, and I want to just take advantage of some Python programming. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we're not trying to become a Python IDE or a Python interface per se. We're mostly just trying to make it avail easy so that people who are in a SAS environment can kind of reach out as best they can. But there's lots of different ways that you can interact with Python and R. For example, Proc IML's been, the SAS IML's been around for a while and has R processing available. But we're just trying to make it easier and easier, and I think that's kind of what you're seeing in this is as easy as possible.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that context and perspective. I just love the collaboration it facilitates between, the programmers,
Right.
like whatever language they prefer,
That's the
SAS or
goal.
Python, they're able to build on the same page and flow and reach their common goal. So
Right,
thank
because
you
let's
so,
face it.
yeah,
Yeah, no, their problems are hard enough already, so we don't need to make it
yeah,
harder by saying, "Oh no, you gotta have to pick a language."
right. They can work in harmony, all on the same
There you
songbook.
go. All right, so before we go, let me ask you. So I've really enjoyed the parade of costumes. That was kind of fun.
Oh, what? Oh,
Oh,
huh,
what?
hmm,
Whoops.
okay, okay.
Nothing. Never
Well,
mind. Nothing. Never mind.
um, maybe there were plans unbeknownst to me during the show, but I'll have to look into that. I'm glad that it that those made the experience that much more memorable. Thank you.
Okay.
Really appreciate your time, Amy. I'm sure our viewers did too. Hey, everyone out there, if you continue to have questions, hit up the discussion on YouTube or LinkedIn. We're here to answer your questions. And also, check out the SAS Viya release updates community on communities.sas.com. We'll be posting this video there, as well as a written form, kind of show notes, if you will, of what we talked about in this entire show. So thank you, Amy. We can't wait to have you back again on the show. All right, well, that does it. Today just gave you a taste of the release updates from version 2021.1.5. It will be back at you in November, and I don't think it's going to be as spooky, but it's going to be fun. Best way to find out about that show is to subscribe to the SAS Users YouTube channel. Until then, see you later.